Open world games such as Skyrim and Horizon Zero Dawn are relatively easy to come by nowadays, and yet looking through Nintendo's catalog of games, it's apparent that the company has never dabbled much in the genre.
Older titles such as Super Mario 64 and Sunshine were open world in a micro sense, containing numerous smaller yet still open-ended areas, and the Legend of Zelda series has always contained large worlds that provide some freedom of exploration, but are relatively linear in their progression. While the company has still produced few open world titles, Nintendo has been experimenting with this genre of video games quite a bit more with their newest console. A lot of Nintendo's biggest mascots have been gifted open world titles on the Switch to some degree. Mario made a return to his sandbox-styled worlds for the first time in over a decade, Link ventured into the most seamless and massive variant of Hyrule Kingdom ever created, and Shulk, with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, was finally granted access to the most liberating location on Bionis yet. As far as I can tell, it appears that even Kirby's next adventure, taking place in a post-apocalyptic world, will provide a great deal of explorative freedom as well. Of course, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is a JRPG and not an open world title, but Super Mario Odyssey, while being segmented into different areas, as I'm sure Kirby and the Forgotten Land will be, still contains a semblance of the non-linearity that is present in a definitional open world game such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. While two of these three games are not fundamentally open-ended in their entirety, I find it very refreshing to see some of my favorite faces of Nintendo being pushed into new, unfamiliar territory. And it's even more exciting that all three of these games seem to provide vastly different takes on the genre. While anything I can say regarding Kirby and the Forgotten Land can only be considered conjecture, I'd like to talk about this upcoming game as well as the Switch's two already released open world titles, and how each one takes its liberating genre and does, or potentially will do, something unique with it.
With how prominent open worlds have been on the Nintendo Switch, it's only fitting that the console celebrated its release date in unison with one of the most highly anticipated and acclaimed games of the genre, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
As I mentioned earlier, this series has been known for its engaging and vibrant world since its onset, yet the linearity of its game's stories prevent these titles from achieving the feel that an open world game should have. This has never been a hindrance, or at least to me, but now with the implementing of Breath of the Wild into the series, said linearity was removed while both the story and engagement remained intact. Not only was this release the first of Nintendo's open world experiments, but also the most faithful in respects to the genre. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild contains one massive world, the Kingdom of Hyrule, which is seamless in its exploration, greeting players with loading zones only when they enter a shrine, dungeon, or cutscene. Practically every area from the snow-capped mountains of the Hebra region to the searing crags of Death Mountain is contained on a singular map. Even as Link rides upon one of the divine beasts, which are loaded in a separate map than that of the rest of Hyrule, the devastated kingdom can still be seen far in the distance. While The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild thrives off of its boundless world, which is comprised of both long dilapidated battlefields and struggling towns, this title's world isn't the only notable implementation brought about by its genre. The lack of a linear path of progression within this game also led to many gameplay elements straying from their usual approach. Perhaps the most notable example of this is seen in Champion Link's item inventory, or lack thereof. In past titles, Link would obtain numerous items, such as the hookshot, iron boots, slingshot, and boomerang in a set order. Typically, these items would be required to progress through the dungeons they were found in, and then be used to solve an occasional puzzle or two throughout the rest of the game. However, because Breath of the Wild lacks a set path for the player to follow, this formula for acquiring items was made dysfunctional. Many of the items present in most titles were promptly removed because of this, and while the lack of a hookshot is slightly disappointing, some of the other well-known items, such as the bow and boomerang, were modified into weapons. Speaking of weapons, they are another convention of the series that was reformed in this title, lacking their permanence that was often taken for granted in other titles. Swords, bows, shields, boomerangs, elemental rods, and all of the other weapons available in this game are consumables, as are all of the foods, ores, flowers, and other materials that Link can scavenge from Hyrule. The open-world genre transformed The Legend of Zelda from a pseudo-linear action-adventure game into a highly explorative title where almost nothing you collect is permanent, save for your experience. This allows the game to push its emphasis more towards survival and discovery than constant progression. And this change in focus, in unison with a vast rendition of Hyrule filled with hundreds of life forms to discover, thousands of secrets to unearth, and endless activities to take part in, is what caused The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild to become one of the most well-renowned games Nintendo has ever created.
Nearly 8 months after The Legend of Zelda was gifted an astounding release which introduced the series to the open world genre, on October 27, 2017, another familiar franchise of Nintendo's was treated in a similar way.
Super Mario Odyssey had obtained a degree of anticipation from fans prior to its release, which was relatively equal to Breath of the Wild, and launched with similar levels of praise as well. Following the release of Super Mario Sunshine, Nintendo's leading mascot, who had grown accustomed to exploring large sandbox-like areas, exited the open-world scene in favor of both revisiting his days of 2D platforming and exploring the galaxies. The Super Mario Galaxy titles, while appearing similar to Super Mario 64 and Sunshine, lacked the freedom that the latter two titles granted. A large majority of the 363 collective Power Stars obtained within these two games are simply found at the end of a linear path or trail of planets. Some galaxies house minor opportunities for exploration, of course, but most are fairly linear. The linearity in these titles didn't necessarily serve as a detriment, however, as they've been regarded as two of the best games Mario has ever starred in. But years later, following the release of Super Mario 3D Land and Super Mario 3D World, fans did begin to crave a return to the mascot's open world origins, and that's exactly what Super Mario Odyssey provided. In Mario's first mainline, well, Odyssey on the Nintendo Switch, following a decade-long drought of doing so, the Jumpman returned to exploring open worlds akin to the Dire Dire Docks and Bianco Hills of old. With this newly liberated level design also came a change in Mario's moveset. While Super Mario Galaxy reprised players' abilities to spin, backflip, and somersault, and Super Mario 3D World implemented rolling into the title's array of actions, the movesets present within these games were lacking the complexity that had been established in Super Mario 64 and reinforced in Sunshine. Super Mario Odyssey, however, revived said complexity of control and escalated it further. Not only are Mario's base controls made more versatile with the implementation of dives and hat throws, but he's also given dozens of alternate control schemes to play around with based on the abilities of the numerous friends, foes, and objects he can possess. While the plethora of moves that Mario and his many iterations can perform are all very unique and entertaining, they also implement a puzzle element into the game thanks to its nature as an open-world collectathon. Super Mario Odyssey, while not a true open-world adventure, does contain numerous smaller-scaled kingdoms which are open-ended. The layouts of these kingdoms range from an isolated tower with very little traversable terrain to an industrialized forest with a small stream, a massive mechanical structure, and a frightening wooded section. Regardless of how different these kingdoms may appear, both in design and layout, all of them share this similarity. They house many collectibles that players have to ponder over how to collect. Each and every one of the hundreds of individual power moons to be found in this game's kingdoms contain their own unique sets of challenges to obtain. In fact, the method that one player uses to collect a specific moon may vary greatly from that of another player. Very few of these collectibles have one required method of being obtained, and so while I may collect a specific power moon by utilizing the aerial movement of a bullet bill, another player may opt to perform some tricky platforming to acquire it instead, or even dive at it from above. Sure, certain methods may be far more practical than others, but the fact that so many power moons could be nabbed in multiple creative ways by using both Mario's hundreds of different maneuvers and the layout of the title's open worlds in creative ways, which created a strong sense of replayability, is what allowed Super Mario Odyssey to not only succeed at bringing Mario back into the genre of sandbox-styled open-world games, but excel at doing so.
Since then, the Nintendo Switch has had numerous other open-world additions to its library, but none that were seen as major Nintendo-developed games until now. As I mentioned earlier, you should take most of what I say regarding this game as speculation,
but it seems as though Kirby and the Forgotten Land is about to throw Nintendo's pink protagonist into his own open world adventure. This game was unveiled in a Nintendo Direct that aired on September 23rd, 2021, and was given a release window of spring of 2022. The 2.5-minute trailer shown in said presentation revealed enough about the game for most viewers to assume that it will be open world, but not enough for any definitive conclusions to be drawn. Certain areas that were showcased appear somewhat linear in structure, while others seem to be more sprawling and expansive, but the latter seem to be more plentiful. While I doubt that this title will contain one world that consists of all of these different environments like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild did, I do believe that Kirby and the Forgotten Land will be more akin to Super Mario Odyssey, being an open world title that contains numerous smaller, though still highly explorable areas. If this is to be the case, I'm very curious about how many collectibles and therefore incentives to explore this game may have. I'm hoping that, just as Odyssey did, this next title in the Kirby series will come complete with countless secrets to uncover, with some perhaps even having numerous methods of acquiring dependent on which copy ability Kirby is currently utilizing. There's not much more I can speculate on given the fact that very little is currently known about the working project, but one thing is for certain. Regardless of whether or not it's a true open world game or not, Kirby and the Forgotten Land will be the first 3D platformer in the mainline Kirby series, and that is exciting enough on its own.
With The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey having pioneered the Nintendo Switch's launch, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land, as well as a sequel to the formerly mentioned title, being on the relatively near horizon, it's clear that Nintendo has been experimenting with the open world genre more than they've ever done so before.
Of course, titles such as Xenoblade Chronicles X and Super Mario 64, vastly different though they may be, both prove that the company isn't entirely new to the genre, but they've certainly been paying more attention to it than they ever have before. To not only see The Legend of Zelda gain its first open world installment since its creation 35 years ago, and Super Mario make a return to its sandbox-styled formatting after a hiatus of nearly 2 decades, but also a trailer for what will be the first fully 3-dimensional platformer in the mainline Kirby series, is exhilarating. Nintendo is yet to fail when it comes to tossing their most famed mascots into an open world, and I'm excited to see what character, aside from Link of course, will be thrown into the genre next. Naturally, it's not confirmed that every series Nintendo is responsible for will get its own open world game, but the mere fact that the company has been opening up to the genre lately has me hopeful that we'll only continue to see more grand, immersive worlds, such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's rendition of the Kingdom of Hyrule. And that's very exciting to me. Thank you all so much for watching.